Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we travel back in time to a few different eras. Firstly with The Northman, the new Viking revenge epic directed by Robert Eggers, and then with our old friend the Doctor in Legend of the Sea Devils, the penultimate episode in Jodie Whittaker's time as the Doctor. But before all that time travel, Alistair, what else have you got?
So I've been watching a show recently that picked up a few bits of buzz, I don't know, a couple of months ago. I've been watching Yellowjackets, which is available in the UK on Now, or I think on Sky Atlantic. It's a show set in the 90s about a group of high school girls on a soccer team who are going to play in the state final, and their plane, whilst off course, crashes in somewhere probably in the remote Canadian wilderness, possibly Oregon. It's not really made specific, but it crashes basically in a sort of forested wilderness, and they're sort of stuck there. And then the TV show has sort of two strands. One is the story of what happens after the crash, and then the other strand is set present day, following some of the characters when they're grown up and what their lives are like post the crash and their sort of brief time of fame after they were discovered. And, I don't know, the trauma that it's left them with and the sort of secrets they're trying to hide. Yeah, it's a good show. It's very entertaining. It's got a sort of wide cast of well-developed characters. Yeah, the cast includes Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis, both who are very good in this. And yeah, there's a sort of slightly odd sense of, I don't know, something creepy going on. It's very good how it kind of sustains this kind of, there's something strange going on. There's, you know, something a bit off about all of this. Kind of that sort of sense of tension in the background.
Yeah, no, I've been meaning to watch this for a few weeks, months possibly. It is one of those shows that's been on my radar for a while. Is this a sort of Lost-esque mystery thing? Is that the upshot?
It definitely owes a lot to Lost, and also owes a lot to Lord of the Flies, which Lost also was heavily influenced by. There is the sense of the sense of something strange is very much like an element to both. It's not quite as obvious as Lost was very much straight up like there's something weird about this island really from the beginning. Like I think it's in the second episode when they get attacked by a polar bear, and then there's sort of the weird mechanical thing they can hear moving around in the forest but can't see, and so they introduced the kind of weird mysteries quite early on. It's a bit more subtle. Like they kind of find things in the forest that could just be bizarre coincidences, could just be signs of something strange. Like they find various sort of mutilated animals, and then the one surviving coach is very much like, don't worry, that's just the wolf did that. Or strange symbols that have been carved that could have been just done by, I don't know, some teenagers at any point in the past, or could be the sign of something more sinister. And that kind of builds slowly, but there definitely is that kind of same kind of weirdness, but it's a bit more of a background thing and a slightly different sort of tone to it.
So it's more of a horror vibe.
Yeah, more of a horror vibe. There's some quite sort of disturbing bits as it goes along. There's a kind of general sense of the sort of madness that overtakes them. There's a lot of sort of mysteries about what's motivating characters. You kind of get a few sort of glimpses in the present day bit. You get a few sort of glimpses back to later on during their time. It says they were in the forest for a year and a half, and you get a few kind of weird like flashbacks within the future that kind of reveal more to what was happening towards the end of their time in the forest, and that you get kind of only these brief glimpses of something that looked very dark and disturbed, but it's put there, but you're not really sure what the details are or what's going on, and you're kind of left to untangle this mystery. There's the 5 or so surviving people. We only know that 5 of them are alive in the present. It's kind of kept a mystery what happened to the other people in the plane, but there's a lot of sense of like they don't want to talk about it, they keep it secret, they've made some kind of agreement to never discuss what happened. So yeah, again, it's a sense of like something dark, something unpleasant, something mysterious, but you kind of have to wait for you to uncover it.
Which I guess makes it hard to discuss on the podcast because I haven't seen it and I would quite like to.
Yeah, it's best kind of going in without it spoiled. Especially it's best going in like, you know, who lives and who dies. Obviously that's some of the big twists. But yeah, I can really recommend this show. It's very well written. There's lots of great 90s references. It's got an amazing like sort of 90s soundtrack to it as well. And you know, it's just, really good show. It definitely deserves the buzz around it. So if you're on the fence about Yellowjackets, I'd recommend watching it.
I gather there's a second season coming. Do you think this is one of those shows where you'll end up wishing they'd just done one season, or do you think it has the potential to run and run?
I think it's got potential, definitely. They're sort of setting up like a broad story. I mean, the first season is only like 10 episodes, where like Lost did like those big American 22 episode seasons. You know that they're in the forest for a year and a half. That's kind of stated quite early on. And by the end of the first season, it's only been a few few months of time has elapsed in the forest. So they're definitely giving them scope to do several seasons of time in the forest. There's also obviously a lot of stuff that's left unresolved, so I think it's definitely got potential to keep going. There's also a lot of characters, so there's a lot of scope to develop more of them as time goes by.
Cool. Good to know there's some hope we're not going to be living in weird resentment of it by the time it gets to season 4.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes, but it's certainly got potential. I'm excited for season 2.
Yeah, no, I need to get on this so we can cover season 2 on the podcast. A lot of people on the timeline seem to start really enjoying it towards the end of the season.
It ramps up actually at the end. Yeah, the last episode especially kind of packs a lot in, but I'm getting dangerously close to spoiling things now.
Okay.
Anyway, I've been watching Yellowjackets. What have you been up to?
My main off-podcast cultural activity, I've been catching up on the X-Men comics, the Jonathan Hickman rebooted X-Men line, which we covered a couple of times over the years. We covered the initial 12-issue interlocking series, House of X, Powers of 10, that started it off. And after that, they launched about 7 or 8, probably more, different ongoing series, which have gone through various phases and started and stopped. So there was Way of X by Cy Spurrier, which we covered at one point. And yeah, the last thing I read, literally last night, was Inferno, which is a mini-series by Jonathan Hickman, which actually wraps up his time on the books because he's moving on. It sort of resolves some of his plot lines, in that one of the main elements of House of X Powers of 10 was the character Moira McTaggart, who turned out to be a mutant who had the power to reincarnate herself and start the whole timeline again with knowledge of like all her previous lives when she dies. She's not really appeared since Powers of 10 finished, with the vague understanding I think that they were sort of waiting for Jonathan Hickman to continue her story. And with this, his final miniseries, he's finally done that. Much like Yellowjackets, it's one of those things you don't really want to spoil, but it's good. It brings together a lot of storylines that we've been percolating for several years. This sort of showdown between Moira, Xavier, Magneto, and various other mutant factions. I think what I quite like about Inferno, it's one of the things that is good about some of Hickman's other stuff as well, is the sort of politicking of it. Like on the Krakoan era X-Men, they have this quiet council, this sort of ruling body, which is, a bunch of mutants voting on what the island nation should do. And there's a lot of politicking and a lot of scenes of people like whipping votes, I guess, by blackmailing people or bribing them and so on. And there's a lot of people doing underhand tricks to win votes and then springing traps on people. It's a very nice slow burn, Inferno. I was a little sceptical that Hickman could wrap up his run in 4 issues, but he's done surprisingly well.
So now that you've read the complete Hickman X-Men experience, does it come together as a complete work that you'd recommend?
Sort of yes and no, in that yes, it's all good work by Hickman, and I would definitely recommend reading it as comics to read, although, to be honest, he has left without wrapping everything up. Like, the Krakoan setup is continuing. I'll spoil that much, because you can tell just by glancing at, the cover of an X-Men comic. The Krakoa stuff, the island nation governed by the Quiet Council, the setup that Hickman roughly started, will be continuing beyond Hickman leaving. It doesn't entirely feel like the story has finished, or he has very much pushed it forward into a new phase by moving Moira on, and a few other characters with her. So yeah, it doesn't really feel quite like a complete story, but it did feel like it felt like a big event. And some comics events, can feel very slap, 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 zap, 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 constipated energy blasts, things we talked about before. But this does feel quite clever and subtle and politically thought out, which I did enjoy.
Oh, that's good. That's good, yeah. And have you completed Cy Spurrier's run as well, that we reviewed the first few issues of on the podcast?
I've read the first 6-issue storyline of it. He is continuing, like a lot of the other X books are carrying on. There's a new Cy Spurrier book which carries on the same storyline called Legion of X, funnily enough, Starving Legion, which is starting in a couple of weeks, I think. So yeah, the Cy Spurrier stuff is still going, but I have read what's been published of it so far.
Yeah, I remember enjoying the bits we read on the podcast as well, and I assume it continues to be good?
Yeah, it's good. It does what Cy Spurrier often does, in that it grows to cover quite big, broad, sweeping cosmic concepts, but still just about manages to remain character-based and entertaining. It might be a hard read if you're not used to superhero comics and big sweeping energy things, but yeah, Nightcrawler's still a very engaging character. The sort of Nightcrawler Legion back and forth is quite good in that comic.
Yeah. I was impressed by the Hickman stuff we read, by how sort of epic in scope and scale the story was, taking in time travel, this mutant island, the resurrecting dead mutants, kind of building a new society. It's a big story.
Yeah, I think a few years down the line, that comic has very much entered the canon, I think. It's now, I think, seen as one of the 3, most important X-Men stories that have been done, I think, or most important X-Men eras. Like,
Wow.
the last one was Grant Morrison, whose work I think you've read some of in the early 2000s, did some X-Men, which is also regarded as kind of important in pushing the X-Men into the 21st century. And yeah, I think Hickman's generally seen as the first big push forward since then.
Wow, that's epic. I mean, for something that's been going since the 60s to say this is one of the sort of three most defining eras of the comic.
Yeah, I think pretty much that's what's happened. It'll be interesting to see if it can keep the momentum up with Hickman gone. They've started a new book called Immortal X-Men, which is written by Kieran Gillen, which apparently is going to be carrying on this sort of back and forth, backstabby political stuff in the Quiet Council, which sounds like it'll be fun. Kieran Gillen, obviously, another podcast favourite.
Yeah. I mean, between Cy Spurrier, Hickman, and Kieran Gillen, they're covering all the people we have read and loved on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I could definitely approve of their taste in interesting, ambitious writers. And there's quite a few other good people as well. I've been enjoying, there's a book called Hellions by Zeb Wells, which has been good, although he's sadly, I think, wrapped that up and left. Although he's leaving so he can take over Spider-Man, so, what could I really complain about as a Spider-Man fan?
Yeah, it sounds very epic. I'm glad that the process we've begun has a satisfactory conclusion.
Yeah, no, it's fun to see Hickman come back to the Moira McTaggart stuff. As I say, it's not quite as massive and sweeping and epic. It's focusing more on the sort of conflict between a few characters than on, the massive time travel stuff. Which is kind of a shame, because I do enjoy it when Hickman does that, but I'm sure he'll get back to it in one of his many other projects. And yeah, if you want to read a lot of X-Men comics, by the way, you don't want to spend a huge amount of money, because there are millions of them. Do what I do and subscribe to Marvel Unlimited. All you need to do is wait about 3 months, and then they just appear for, like, the cost of about 1.5 comics a month.
Yeah, that does sound like a good way to save money and read lots of X-Men comics, or just Marvel comics in general.
Well, yeah, if you ever fancy, or you ever wake up and you're in the mood to read a load of Marvel comics, and you're comfortable reading comics on a tablet, then just subscribe to Marvel Unlimited for a bit, read a load of them, then knock off. Oh, and also they're launching DC Infinite, or DC Universe Infinite, or whatever it's called, in Britain in the next couple of weeks, I think, so you'll soon be able to do the same for DC.
I'm surprised it's taken this long to come up with a similar product.
They've had the same product in America for about a year and a half, 2 years, I think. I'm not entirely sure why it's taken them so long to launch here, but yeah, it's about time that I stopped having to pay for individual DC comics.
Next up this episode, we'll be discussing Robert Eggers' The Northman. Prince Amleth is the son of a great Viking king. However, shortly after he is confirmed as his father's successor, his uncle kills his father and takes his throne. Years later, Amleth is grown and is now played by Alexander Skarsgård, and along with Olga, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, has tracked his uncle to Iceland, where he embarks on a campaign of terror against him. We saw this film recently in the cinema. Nick, what did you think of it?
The film is good. I like the film. Yeah.
That's the review right there. We're done.
Yeah, pretty much. In some ways, it's a very straightforward film, which is, I guess, kind of surprising for Robert Eggers. But yeah, it is possibly a chance for me to break out former MFV catchphrase tight as fuck again, because yeah, this is a very solid film, despite being, nearly 2.5 hours long?
2 hours, 20 minutes. It's quite long, yeah.
Despite being a decent length, it feels very live, very straightforward, very marching ever onwards, stomping through the grey landscape to get to its destination. There's a very brutal efficiency to this film. It's always very clear what's going on. It's always moving on to the next plot points. Alexander Skarsgård's got this steely intensity that just drives the whole thing. It knows what it wants and it goes out and gets it. There are some hints and enjoyable throwbacks and interferences, I guess, from Robert Eggers' more trippy metaphorical films like The Lighthouse and The Witch, or some of The Witch anyway. That stuff does come in, and it is interesting and fun when it comes, and it does slightly prevent this from being a dead straightforward revenge epic. But, there's no mistaking that there is fundamentally, a lot of violence, a lot of swinging metallic grey axes, a lot of hard men being hard. I enjoyed this a lot. It's a revenge movie, but it's very artful.
Yeah, I think this has got to be Robert Eggers' most accessible film, but it's still got all the hallmarks of what you'd expect from his films, such as, a huge amount of research has gone into period detail, including like sort of period language and stuff, and you've got actors delivering lines that you assume at least are the way people would talk or at the time, or to the best of our understanding, and doing it straight up without any hints of irony. There's a real sense of like, we are not going to sort of make this the dialogue or kind of, I don't know, the way people lived, sanitize it or make it like appear like more modern than it is. We're just going to have kind of the history presented as close as it can as it was, and you kind of have to kind of go with it. So it's got that element to his filmmaking. There's kind of always interesting use of music and kind of slightly strange, abstract sort of sounds that he uses in his music, so that's very much there. And again, this sort of, what you touched on, this sort of slightly sense of heightened reality or sort of slightly sense of strangeness, the fact that a lot of his stories are kind of seem to take place on the sort of border between a human world and this kind of greater spiritual or other world, and there's always this sense of like strange things from another ethereal world encroaching on the world of people. So it's got all those elements in it.
Yeah, I guess it's possible if you're, someone who really had their pretension bone tickled by previous Robert Eggers films to come to this and be a bit disappointed about how, in many ways, straightforward a lot of the plot is. I mean, as ever, we dance gleefully around the edge of the spoiler volcano on this podcast. But The Witch and The Lighthouse both have quite strange, trippy endings. This does not really. This ends in the way the genre ends.
And yeah, I suppose on some levels this is an action film. It's got...
On quite a lot of levels, yeah.
It's got big battles in it. There's a villain, there's fight sequences. Yeah, and like I say, it's a sort of Robert Eggers moving into, I don't know, blockbuster territory. I'm not sure if, he might, be one of those directors, a bit more like Martin Scorsese or something like that, who does big budget, high profile thing, then something more like auteur-y afterwards.
One for them, one for me, or whatever.
Yeah. Or maybe he'll just try to do, which is what he's done here, which is blend his signature style into something that's, again, commercially accessible. I mean, there's a lot of people on film Twitter kind of saying, this is one of the first really, I guess, big blockbusters we've had, in a long time that is, an original, basically it's an original story. I think it's based on a Icelandic saga and even credits the original folk writer as co-author of the screenplay. But yeah, in the sense that, this is him doing blockbuster. This is the kind of first, sort of big blockbuster we've had in a while that seems to be not like a adaptation or remake. And I think some people are very excited about that and hope that, it's the first of Robert Eggers, maybe the other directors doing similar sort of things.
Yeah, I don't know how successful this has been money-wise. This is, a rare non-franchise blockbuster that's actually, succeeded and taken a chunk of the box office. But yeah, I think it definitely has that level of mainstream accessibility. I mean, it's a very classic, understandable plot in a lot of ways. I mean, is it based on Hamlet or is Hamlet based on it? It's possibly based on the North myth that inspired Hamlet. Is that the upshot?
I believe that's the idea that I gathered, yeah. But yeah, it's very different to Shakespeare's Hamlet. But yeah, it is based on a sort of folk tale. But yeah, it's supposed to be an adaptation of a folk story. And again, it's almost the iconic underpinning of the revenge story. Straight up a man's father is killed, his mother is taken, his inheritance is stolen from him. He swears revenge, he grows up. He comes back to seek revenge. It's the sort of revenge film distilled.
Yeah, it's very straightforward. As I say, a lot of that credit goes to the tightness of the plot and the sort of driving focus of Alexander Skarsgård as the lead character, who is a massive presence in this film, a huge tower of charisma. It's hard to play this sort of strong silent part and not tip into either self-parody or seem just kind of bland. But he does it, fair enough. Absolutely magnetic whenever he's on screen. What a guy.
Yeah, no, this is definitely the Alexander Skarsgård show in that he is in almost every scene and it's kind of the core of the film. And yeah, I mean, he does, as well as having kind of charismatic leading man presence, he does quite a real full body performance. I mean, he's just really embodies this kind of creature that's made out of sort of rage and hatred. Probably my favourite bit of the film, and it's quite early on, there's a bit when they're in somewhere in Eastern Europe, I think it's possibly in what's in Russia today, and he's joined a band of Viking warriors, and there's a bit where they work themselves up into a berserker rage and then attack this town, and yeah, it's just kind of complete, you can believe people are just absolutely possessed by kind of almost religious fury that the Vikings are possessed before they go into battle. And again, you can believe it from Alexander Skarsgård that he is a Viking berserker.
Well, yeah, there's a bit in this film where they work themselves up into a rage and they're possessed by wolves or dogs or something, and they start acting a bit like wolves or dogs. Yeah, the fact that they can pull this off and that off and still make the film fairly grey and serious and have it all work is... I mean, that I guess is a very Robert Eggers-y thing.
Yes,
that
exactly,
is another moment of peak Robert Eggers' metaphorical surrealism. But yeah, again, he and Alexander Skarsgård and the other actors all make it work.
Yeah, and again, they're doing that sense of this is what it was like in the past, without sort of irony or an intent to make it look modern. Yeah, the Vikings really did work themselves up into these, sort of religious states of hatred and ecstasy, and they kind of believe they've been transformed into wolves or something like that to go out and sort of create carnage. And it's very much there's no attempt to be this is a modern allegory or any sense of no, this is what it was like, as if you were there, to the best of we can recreate it on film and to the best of our understanding, and you just kind of have to accept it.
Yeah, again, it's the straightforwardness of the film if it just presents that attractively, but still, and there it is, and everyone buys into it with such conviction. It's so beautifully shot that you just go along with it. And there's obviously a lot of violence, which is played for maximum squishiness, although, as I think we were talking about shortly after seeing it, it's in some ways quite downplayed. There are a few peak moments of ketchup all over the place, but a lot of the time the violence is kept slightly off screen. Robert Eggers again playing it in a sort of vaguely horror-y way to make what you don't see more horrific than what you actually do.
Yeah, I don't know how much of this is they wanted that 15 certificate, which they got, but there are some quite gruesome bits. I think there's one bit, not really big spoiler this, when Amleth chops up the friends of his uncle's son, carves them all up and nails them to the wall of one of the houses. And yeah, it's quite gruesome to see this sort of like horribly dismembered and mutilated corpses. That's a moment of kind of like, oof, that is, I don't know, gets across almost what you could describe as the barbarism of what a kind of incredibly violent period of history was like. This was a period when there was law was might and the power of the sword, and yeah, you could chop people up, and it really gets across the brutality of the world these people live in.
Well, that's established quite early on, really. Like the big early on scene which we were talking about, where Amleth and his band of raiders just demolished this village, does set the tone fairly early on, but there'll be a lot of hard, sad, casual violence here.
Yeah, and I guess the film has, I think, got some interesting, commentaries on masculinity. Obviously, in this incredibly violent world, premiums were placed on him being strong and being a good fighter and things like that because, it was a very violent and unforgiving world. So that was kind of what was needed to survive. But I think there's something interesting this film's trying to say about how we, a lot of our modern concepts of masculinity are sort of descended from this period, and is there something almost to say that it's not good to live possessed by sort of such hatred and violence in this kind of, masculine way. They're trying to subtly get under the surface of this character and be like, he just lives for murder and to kill the people who's wronged him. Is that, a satisfying way to live? I guess some of the questions the film is raising.
But it's definitely possible to watch the film and ask those questions. I don't know to what extent the film's actually... Is the film that concerned with them? I don't know. I don't know if it really spends that long going, is it good to be a vengeance-crazed Viking warrior? Possibly because surely we already know it isn't, but...
It's not explicit, but I think that's definitely something that the film is either overtly or inadvertently exploring. And there's definitely a sense of, it's very much a sort of a template for masculinity that Alexander Skarsgård embodies in this film. And I don't know, I guess there are questions to raise. When you see the world that kind of masculinity came from, and then it's so obviously different to our world, I guess it raises the question, should this be something that we look on today as, a model for masculinity because our world has changed so much from that world?
Well, yeah, the sort of the world building around it is very vivid, very impactful. Yeah, it's always very clear that he lives in this very sort of hard grey world, which I guess, yeah, it does excuse, maybe not, does explain at least some of his predilections towards chopping people up.
Yeah, but as well as Alexander Skarsgård, I thought the rest of the cast was very strong as well. Anya Taylor-Joy, who's a previous Robert Eggers collaborator. Yeah, I thought she was very good in this film. Again, yeah, sort of helping Amleth in his sort of reign of terror. I really sort of, believed their chemistry, and I thought she, did a kind of a good counterbalance, being the sort of quieter, subtler one next to his sort of mountain of rage.
Yeah, no, she's good. I could say this of almost all the side parts. I expected, Anya Taylor-Joy and Willem Dafoe and stuff to be in it more, but yeah, as you said earlier, it really is a very Skarsgård heavy film. But yeah, everyone else who's there, as a result, I think, maybe act very hard in the bits they're in. Anya Taylor-Joy has some very good moments, as does Nicole Kidman, actually, as the Queen. She's probably only got 3 or 4 scenes, actually, where she actually has much to do in terms of speech, which is very, very good.
Yeah. No, she's, has a crucial scene which almost sort of redefines the film, which I won't spoil because it's important to, it would kind of spoil the experience for you. But yeah, she's got, certainly a few very crucial scenes. And Ethan Hawke, who's, only in the beginning of the film playing Amleth's father, who's dispatched quite early on. But yeah, kind of the opening of the film is kind of a short film about his life, really. But yeah, again, I thought Ethan Hawke very, very good as this Viking king, and you really get a sense of how the son looks up to him and sort of idolizes his father. And yeah, and it's interesting as Ethan Hawke's having something of a moment between this and Moon Knight, which we discussed last time.
Yeah, and Klaus Bang as his uncle. The sort of villain is quite an interesting character in, but he's not really... I don't want to say he's not very villainous, because he is clearly a bit of a dick in some ways. But he's not very... I don't know, he doesn't seem to get much satisfaction from it. He doesn't seem very happy in his villainy. He's not, a massive speechifying villain or anything. It's a very sad, defeated part, really, or a very low-key role in which, yes, he's done some clearly very villainous things in his past, but he's kind of, at the point where Amleth's turned up to kill him, he's kind of... A lot of the wind has gone out of his sails, really. He's just kind of retired to the hills. Yeah,
and I think he provides an interesting sort of counterpoint to his brother, Amleth's father, and Amleth himself. And obviously, Amleth is very much modeled himself on his father and wants to live up to what he thought his father stood for. And again, the uncle is a sort of counterbalance, a sort of different, way of being, again, like a man in this world. And there's a sort of subtle contrast there. Klaus Bang's very good. And interesting as I most recently saw him in a film called The Square from 2017, in which he plays almost entirely different character. It's a movie set in an art gallery in which he plays the director of the art gallery. So it really shows his range in that he's playing a Viking in this. He's a man of many talents.
Yeah, apparently he was also in the Stephen Moffat Dracula, but I have not seen it.
Right. No, I
One
did
day.
not see that either.
But yeah.
No, there's a lot to recommend here, certainly. Not least also the beautiful Icelandic scenery. Robert Eggers always has like a real eye for kind of landscape photography, especially capturing a sort of bleak wilderness. And, you know, Iceland is absolutely perfect for that kind of style of photography. It is spectacularly beautiful.
Yeah, they've clearly found this sort of huge desolate mountain range to set the whole thing in, and this is probably an insult to Iceland, but it really captures that absence of all hope. Good work, lads. And yeah, I think this has come over fairly well. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being one of the big sort of stealth favourites of the year from a reviewer standpoint. It's very much got what it needs to appeal to, as we sort of said earlier, you know, the pretentious film fans and the action film fans who just want to see the axes swing. This could well be a bit of a crossover hit. Who knows?
Yeah, I do think that come the end of the year, this one will be one of the films that's on people's list as something that was interesting and unusual that came out. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what the rest of the year has in store. But this is certainly, I think, one of the films I was most excited for this year, and it lived up to expectations, which is good.
Yeah, I was expecting a Viking revenge film, and I can confirm, lived up to that by miles.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Doctor Who, Legend of the Sea Devils, the Easter special where the Doctor, Yaz and Dan visit 19th century China where they meet pirates and the Doctor's old enemy, the Sea Devils. Whilst romantic sparks fly between the Doctor and Yaz, a sense of oncoming doom lurks in the Doctor's future. We saw this episode over Easter. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think this continues the current streak of being more entertaining than a lot of the time Jodie Whittaker's been the Doctor, a lot of the Chris Chibnall episodes. I think there's a basic sense of fun and romp to it, which at least makes it watchable. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as I did the Dalek New Year's special, or a lot of the Flux stuff, but yeah, it's fine, it moves along. It could maybe have used a bit more sparky banter or better jokes, but it's basically fun enough. To be honest, and this is unusual for this podcast, which often gets a bit stuck talking about the writing, there seem to be some production troubles here. Like, this did not seem the most beautifully made of Doctor Who episodes. Characters seem to sort of teleport from place to place without that much in the way of establishing shots or connections. Only a few people seem to be allowed to be in a shot at the same time, and there seems to be a lot of sometimes quite clunky and shit green screen. I don't know. I know this is Doctor Who and we have to moderate our expectations. And also, I'm sure it was filmed under COVID protocols, which doesn't make those things easier. But I don't know. It was not the most beautifully made of episodes, which did distract me a bit at times.
Yeah, there was something that looked slightly shonky about it. But I did enjoy it overall as an episode. It had an interesting time travel adventure, you know, pirates, swashbuckling, the sort of things that you know, Doctor Who does well and was very enjoyable. I agree with you that I think the Dalek New Year's special with the time loop was probably a much tighter episode. I mean, it had a much more straightforward premise and a much more clear source of tension. Whereas this one had quite a few plots for a short thing. There's 19th century plot. There was a bit when they travel back in time to the 17th century. Yeah, they kind of brought in a sort of historical figure who was a Chinese famous pirate. They had the Sea Devils themselves. They had various character bits with the Doctor, Yaz and Dan. So a lot going on, which probably made it a slightly weaker episode than the tighter, more efficient, more pared down New Year's special.
I think for me the difference was more that I think the guest characters came over a lot more strongly in the New Year's special. Especially the main one played by Aisling B, I think it was. Whereas the guest characters here, I mean, they were fine. I understood their plots, but they didn't really tug on my emotions that much. But I guess that's the emotional core of this was more the Dr. Yaz stuff. But yeah, the guest characters here were not as strongly put over, I thought.
There was also an element that they had to kind of spend more time explaining who the Sea Devils were and what their plans were, because they're a new villain and their kind of history needs to be reintroduced. Whereas the advantage of using the Daleks as they did at New Year's is that everyone knows the Daleks and everyone knows what their deal is, and their deal isn't that complicated either. And yeah, it's interesting to see the Sea Devils back are obviously an iconic 70s Doctor Who villain.
As someone who isn't a Doctor Who hardcore fan or connoisseur, the Sea Devils basically just damp Silurians.
Yeah, they are from the same period of history and a similar species. I believe even the Silurians and Sea Devils were introduced in the same episode back in the 70s. However, I should have checked that before I just stated on the podcast. And maybe I should have done that when I was researching this episode and researching these notes. That would be something to look into.
I mean, I'm just commenting on the similarity of their origins, really.
Yeah, no, they are definitely a similar villain. And we get into the point with Doctor Who villains that obviously they've done like all the sort of villains that regularly reoccur. The Sea Devils, I think, have 2 or 3 adventures. So we're getting to the point of the villains they're bringing back are famous ones, but not ones that the Doctor had many encounters with in the past. Like I say, I think there may only be 2 or so Sea Devil adventures, but obviously they did stick in people's minds. They are something that kind of captured the zeitgeist at the time, because they were a quite scary and effective villain for 70s Doctor Who. I mean, we've had the Zygons they did in the Peter Capaldi era, and the Zygons are only in one classic adventure, although they are an iconic Doctor Who villain.
Well, yeah, I think by the end of the Russell T Davies era, they'd done, I think, a pretty huge chunk of the iconic villains you might want to bring back, hadn't they? I mean, he did, basically over the course of his first 3 seasons, he did Daleks, Cybermen, Master. That's a fair chunk of them. Yeah,
they're the big ones, really. They're the ones that get more than have more than 2 or 3 adventures. I mean, in the 4th season of the Russell T Davies era, he brought back the Sontarans, who've, there's probably way more Sontaran adventures in New Who than in Classic Who. I think the Sontarans only had 3 or so stories in the 30 years of Classic Who. So, but again, they're some of the more iconic villains.
I mean, I don't think we're here for, the nostalgia at this point. I mean, the Sea Devils could just as easily be a new creation, but the fact that they're also an old villain is basically an Easter egg at this point.
Yeah, I mean, partly I think it is a nostalgia thing for older Doctor Who fans to bring them back. I guess partly because if they're only doing 3 specials this year, they want to make them more of an event. So bringing back a classic villain, especially one that's not been done since Old Who, is another way to make this more of an event. Yeah, but I don't know, part of me did make me think, why bring back these classic villains? There was a lot of them being brought back at this point, and I don't know, what purpose are they trying to serve? I mean, Russell T Davies did say that he would only bring back classic villains to make a point with them, which is, I guess, a noble thing. I mean, his points that he was making with classic villains started unsubtle and got even less subtle. They were in order: religion is bad, tech takes away our humanity, don't trust politicians, they're manipulating you, and finally, cars are bad. So not really the most, I guess, subtle message he was going to do, but at least he said he was going to try and use them for some point.
It's a children's programme, lads.
That is true.
I guess the point being made with the Sea Devils is now we can do pirate stuff. As some people pointed out, we already did pirate stuff with Matt Smith in season 6, but I hate to break it to everyone, that was actually quite a while ago now. So I think it's okay to do another pirate episode.
Yeah, that was 2 Doctors ago, and
2 Doctors ago, and probably a solid 10 or slightly less years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy that we're getting around to we're a few years away from 20 years of New Who. I mean, it won't be long before New Who's been around for longer than Old Who.
Yeah, no, I think in a couple of years, Russell T Davies may well be able to celebrate his own 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one of the things he's come back for, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of being a pirate story, it was great. They even had sort of city costumes and kind of slightly self-aware jokes about the city costumes, which, again, it's all good and entertaining stuff.
Yeah, that was Dan, wasn't it? Wearing his city pirate costume. Yeah, I'm still enjoying Dan, even if I don't fully understand why he's in it. It's a strange combination of, he's a very likeable presence, John Bishop. He usually gets the enjoyable lines, his little emotional storyline with his love interest. It's quite nice. Still don't fully understand why they didn't just do these last 3 episodes, or 9 episodes, I guess, with just the Doctor and Yaz. I'm still not entirely sure what Dan really adds, but at the same time, I quite like him as a presence, so I don't think about it that much.
I do feel that, in this episode, especially, but also a bit in the previous one, that Dan's role has been sort of diminished as the Doctor Yaz romance story has kind of moved more to the prominence. And although that was a sort of a subplot in the New Year's special, in this episode it becomes very much like a much more key part of the plot, and it's definitely becoming a rising importance thing. I mean, and partly I think there's been lots and lots of stories about men in the Doctor Who universe. The fact that they're focusing on, for these episodes, a relationship between 2 women is at least something different we've not really seen in Doctor Who before. Yeah, and it is breaking new ground, so there's lots to enjoy there.
Yes, even though at this stage it does start to feel like it may mostly serve as something else to feel sad about when the 13th Doctor dies in 1 episode's time.
I am concerned that this is going to end in a sort of disappointing way, this storyline of Yaz falling in love with the Doctor, partly because every storyline of someone falling in love with the Doctor ends badly to a degree. And I stopped watching Killing Eve after season 2, which we gave a pretty damning review to on this podcast. I know it just wrapped up at the end of season 4, and people are unhappy about the ending. I mean, I can say more, but I guess spoilers for Killing Eve, which you may or may not be watching.
I guess we shouldn't spoil the ending of Killing Eve when we're not even reviewing it, but yes, I know the ending you mean, and it does come from a similar position, yes.
Yes, and I'm worried that this is what they're going to do with Doctor Who. Probably less violent because it's not a show about assassins, it's a children's show, as you said. But as though I'm excited about this plotline of the Yaz falling in love with the Doctor, which is new and different, but at the same time, I think it will just have a tragic ending, which will probably be disappointing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's Doctor Who, there's time travel, there's gimmicks. Like, there was a whole bit in, what was it, the last River Song episode, where they got to spend 30 years together on a planet over a single night before River Song went to her death. I suppose they could always do something like that, or they could just have them kiss once and then she dies. Who knows?
Rose got her identical duplicate Doctor to live with in another dimension, I thought. That was Catherine Tate Doctor Who series with Russell T Davies, which was definitely like 10 years ago.
The Rose stuff was nearly 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah, but Rose got stuck in another dimension, then Rose came back, and then they duplicated the Doctor, so the David Tennant Doctor, so Rose got to have a happy ending with a duplicate version of the David Tennant Doctor. But not one who was a Time Lord who would regenerate, just one who would just be David Tennant. That was the ending.
I know. I remember finding it pretty baffling when I watched it. Is this a happy ending?
I guess it's more of a happy ending than...
Death?
Yeah, than death, I suppose. Or people's memories being erased, which is a frequent Doctor Who trope. I'm not saying that they can't do Doctor romance happy endings of a sort, as, you know, you've done the River Song one and things like that, but I am concerned that this is going to have a disappointing, unsatisfactory ending that may be sad, but may also be, disappointing, as I said.
Yeah, I mean, there's a trailer at the end of this episode for the next episode. I didn't really tell us much, to be honest. I don't know. My only real opinion about the next episode is that I hope it doesn't mention too much Timeless Child, The Division stuff, but I suspect that's inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, what I did enjoy about both this episode and the New Year's one was the fact that they really didn't bring in at all the Division, the kind of Doctor Who coming from another dimension sort of thing. All of that, I don't know, broader stuff that isn't actually that interesting.
Yeah, I know. Part of me does wonder if they're going to spend the final episode basically writing that back out of continuity again. Like, have the Master turn up and go, lol, I was lying, it was all a trick, somehow.
I can believe that.
Yeah, me too. Which might sound like I'd be happy about it and it's me getting what I want, but actually just makes me feel more gently annoyed that they bothered to put us through that in the first place.
Yeah, unless they can come up with some amazing reason why the Master did this whole trick.
So yeah, long story short, this was a fun romp, but a fun romp that almost makes me wonder how exactly they're going to cram all the non-fun romp stuff they have to do into one episode.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I really felt that some of this was really overshadowed by the build-up to the finale. They did a good job of sort of lacing this sense of impending doom through the episode. So, there's something bad is coming. But then again, they've got, 1 hour-long special to wrap it all up.
To be fair, I quite liked the fact that they didn't lean too hard on the something bad is going to happen. I always feel like I might be dying.
Yeah.
Metaphorically. I don't know, we had quite a lot of that towards the end of some Doctor's eras. I think specifically Tennant and Capaldi got on that pretty hard.
Yeah.
I don't entirely mind them taking a few steps back from it this time. Fair enough. She's going to die anyway. We all know she's going to die. They all die. But not spending the last few episodes banging on about it is not the end of the world.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, and this final episode will be part of the centenary of the BBC celebration. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they do with that.
I'm hoping for some blatant pandering.
I think you may get what you want.
I'm hoping they return to Television Centre at the birth of the BBC and meet Mr. BBC.
Yeah. But no, this is, I think, very much in the vein of Chris Chibnall's found a sort of tone and approach that works with his incarnation of the Doctor. It's just a shame it's taken 2 seasons or so to get to that point.
I more or less agree, although I will still say that this is still just, decent rather than great. I'm happy it is consistently decent rather than inconsistently mediocre. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I suppose. These specials are not up there with some of the best of the Russell T Davies specials.
But yes, it's fine. As I think I said in the review of that Dalek episode, I no longer feel like a completist chump for watching it, and that's something. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can get more of the same on our website, including previous episodes, deleted scenes, essays, and such. And if you enjoy the whole experience, then why not go to your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Thank you.
You can also find more from us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast, or find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And you can find more from me, where I'm no longer talking about my Kickstarter, quite as much at nickmb at Twitter or nickbryan.com. In fact, the first issue of my Kickstarter comic Death of a Necromancer is now available to buy in PDF form on my online shop if you don't chuck with any of that Kickstarter shit. And meanwhile, we will be back in a fortnight where we will be having an all Marvel event as we discuss Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and the whole first season of Moon Knight. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.